Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and a happy Friday. We are so excited to have another coffee and conversation session with Kathryn Russell. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you again.
Yes, me too. And for everyone here, my name's Jess. I'm the community manager here at PairTree, and we are your hub for healthily navigating adoption. And we are so excited to have Kathryn here to talk about another very important, but I feel like it's kind of an often overlooked topic in adoption, which is the hospital experience. And Kathryn, you are a licensed social worker and the director of Absolute Love Adoptions, where you are just a phenomenal home study provider, but you're also an incredibly fierce advocate for expectant and birth parents. And again, we're just so excited to have you with us this morning. Do you want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your work with Absolute Love?
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us, everybody. My agency is small. We're in Pennsylvania. We're a small nonprofit, and we have really sort of shifted the work that we're doing away from, the basic placement and adoption services to really figure out what was not existing in the adoption space that maybe was a void that we could fill. And when I started really listening and looking, it was the same conversations over and over. So it was a lot of this discussion around birth parents not feeling like they were really seen or valued in the experience, and the feeling like after placement they vanished, they disappeared from the conversation altogether. So a lot of the work that we do really centers around educating families prior to match and placement, and even after. But so we can kind of reshape some of these ideas, figure out where they came from, and kind of help break down those bias or stereotypes that you might have about what adoption looks like, expectations, figure out where you acquired those, break them down, and then rebuild them in a way that is going to be more compassionate, more competent to then move forward into a match and placement. And we really figured that there's not a lot of these conversations going on, yet these are places where we really should be talking a lot more. I think the way this, conversation today about the hospital experience, these topics that we're going to talk about that day, that experience is the start of your journey as an adoptive parent, and it's the start of a woman's journey as a birth parent. And so for your child, it's their start where these two stories overlap. So really figuring out how to be mindful of all the dynamics happening in the hospital experience, and really engage in this space in a way that's healthy and competent is really a place where you can make a lot of growth, that really does impact how your then lifelong experience in the adoption constellation goes. So really important stuff we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to kind of keep in mind when we talk about the hospital experience that you're basically two separate families and stories in the same hallway. And at one end, you have adoptive parents who are leaving with full arms and full hearts and just full of so much joy. But at the other end of the same hallway, you have birth families that are leaving with an empty womb, empty arms, and now kind of left to navigate this tremendous loss and grief. And I think that's a really important framework to kind of keep in your mind when you're talking about the hospital experience and looking at what that experience is going to look like for you and your family and your journey.
Yeah, I hear people say a lot that it is often the best day in the lives of an adopting parent and the worst day in the lives of a birth parent, and how those two things exist at the same time, and how you kind of create space for that and really, I guess, dwell in that duality where you can be
Mhm.
joyous, but also know that it's a really tough day as well. It's
Yeah.
complex, and again, not something that there's a lot of how-to guides for how to do this. And I think that a lot of what we'll talk about today really just gives people some tools and some experience so that when they're in this situation, they sort of in their mind can be like, okay, I remember talking about this. I knew this was going to happen, or this could happen. So that then you kind of have some spaces to pull from to maybe behave in a way that is more kind, more empathetic, and really does better create and hold that space for everyone to have both joy and sorrow that day.
Yes, absolutely. And so today that's what we're talking about, the hospital experience. But Kathryn, what does that, when we say the hospital experience, what does that actually mean? And why is it so important for prospective adoptive parents to understand that and be prepared for it even more even more so than, someone who is pregnant and preparing for their own hospital experience as they're delivering a child naturally.
So I think that in this process, we have a lot of focus on educating about the process. And I think there's a lot of conversation around, the legal process and what to get for a baby and how to create the nursery. But there's not a lot of conversation around what to expect this day. And I think it is so essential just to have some frame of reference for what it's going to look like. It's challenging to educate about because it's going to look so unique depending on a lot of variables. So, are you traveling to another state? That's going to affect what this looks like. Have you met mom before? Is dad involved? Have you met dad before? Are these strangers? Is this a situation where mom delivered at the hospital and left, and the social worker calls and is trying to find a family? In which case, you're not going to meet mom. Is this a situation where you have a great relationship nurtured beforehand? She chose you, you've had video calls together. And so meeting her at the hospital is something that you've talked about. Are you going to be there for the delivery? Um, are you staying in the hospital? Are you staying at a hotel? There are so many factors to this that are going to really impact how this looks. And so it's hard to educate from a place of here's what to expect. This is what it looks like. So with everything that Jess and I say today, I think it's important just to remember that there will be nuances to your specific experience that, we simply just can't break it each situation down to the minutia of that, but we'll give you some kind of general feelings about what it might look like. So generally speaking, we're preparing expectant parents to go to the hospital, have a baby, which is a wild experience. Lots of prep that they do to have that experience. The prep that you need to do as the adopting family is really internal, I think. I think it's a lot of work for what are my expectations of this scenario that's in front of me. I think the biggest thing for families is recognizing that whatever this looks like, this is not yet your child. And this might be your child, but it also might not be your child. And I recognize that that's a really heavy thing to know and to have to wrestle with internally. But showing up at the hospital and walking into the space as though this is your child when mom has not signed consent, I think is a huge error. So really that frame of reference entering into the hospital, again, whether that's you're going and joining her for delivery or whether you're going and meeting just the baby, whatever this looks like, going in and knowing that until consents are signed, she's an expectant mom, she's a mom, she's not a birth mom, and this is not yet your child. I think that's a huge piece of where we need to kind of focus what we're talking about. But when
Yes,
we talk about,
absolutely.
yeah, when we're talking about the hospital experience, we're really just referring to, okay, you get the call that she's delivering and you go, and however long you are in that space, whether it's physically at the hospital waiting to take placement of the child, whether it's at the hospital caring for the child, whether it's rooming in with the child, or whether it's simply going to the hospital after mom has discharged and baby's been discharged and meeting baby and bringing baby home. So all of those days are what we're referring to as the hospital experience.
Yes. And so, as we are preparing for the hospital experience, one of the biggest things and one of the most important conversations that I think professionals need to be having with expectant moms is in creating a hospital plan. And we know that babies are unpredictable. So sometimes hospital plans are going to just go completely out the window. Mine did. But also, you never know how an expectant mom is going to feel when she's actually in the situation of giving birth. And so keeping in mind that human emotions are going to factor in and can also completely change a hospital plan. But what should be included in a hospital plan? What conversations should we be having with expectant moms so that both expectant moms and adopting families have kind of an expectation of what that experience could potentially look like?
So if you're working with an agency and a social worker, when we are showing up at the hospital to coordinate a placement, we are typically sending the hospital a plan. And that hospital plan should include everything we know about the situation. So expectant mom, expectant dad, their information, the mom's due date, her intentions for naming the child, if she has a name picked out already. We are talking about who the intended family is. We typically list who the family coming to town might be, what their address is, phone number, contact information, so that the hospital is aware of who's we're expecting to see in this space. And that, of course, is if mom has already chosen a family and there is an intended family. We also include in this plan things like her care, what she's expecting to happen at the hospital. Us as an agency, Absolute Love, excuse me, we hire a doula for every woman who's delivering with our agency. And I think that is really essential, because what a doula does beforehand is sits with mom, educates her about what to expect during pregnancy and delivery and what her choices might be. If you haven't had a child biologically, there's a ton of choices that you can make in that space. And I think people generally don't know this stuff. But there's a lot of choices for how you want to deliver that you should think about beforehand. And a doula is going to help mom think about some of those things and figure out what's important for her. And then on this hospital plan, we're going to include any of that content that she's decided is important. So does she want an epidural? Who does she want in the room with her? Does she want to hold the baby? Does she want to breastfeed? What are the things about her birth experience that she feels are important? And that all goes in the hospital plan. Now, obviously, a hospital plan is a plan. It's not a contract. So there's tons of room for things to change. But the idea is that before mom gets to delivery, she's had those conversations with a professional about what birth might look like and what her choices are, and really figured out what her deep feelings are and her deep desires for those choices about her body and her child, what those are. But then that she's also thought through some of these conversations about, how do we pull adoptive family in? What does she want this to look like? Does she want them there at delivery? Who does she want at delivery? Where does she want them to be? Standing at her head, standing at her feet, waiting in the hallway, waiting at a hotel. So she sort of has to start thinking about what she expects from this process, because she sets the tone. If she says, no, thank you, I don't want them there, then the family's not going to be there. If she says, yes, I would like them there, then the family has been invited to be there. But with all of these things, she can change her mind. So she gets to the hospital and her plan says, yes, I wanted adoptive mom in the room with me. And she gets there and, 2 hours into delivery, she's like, this just isn't working for me. I need you to leave the room. Then that's just what it is. So this plan is a plan. It's really wanting her to take that time to think through all of the choices after baby's here. Who holds baby? Who feeds baby? Who bathes baby? What do you want those days until discharge to look like, so that we've had this conversation? Now, ideally, this stuff is written down. So me as a social worker will have these conversations with mom. I'll talk her through a lot of these things. I'll push her to really think about what this could look like for her. Find those spaces where she feels really strongly about something, and then put that on paper. This is so that I know how to help that day. I know what her wishes were before all the chaos and intensity and physical challenges of labor and delivery. But also it gives me a point of reference to say, okay, you said this, 3 weeks ago. How are you feeling now? And it helps really guide that conversation. So there is someone there saying, I know you wanted this initially, how we feel now, and how can I help you get that? So in context of families, right, you invited family in for delivery, but now you're feeling like it's too much. How can I help create that space so you can have this time for yourself? So that's ideally what a hospital plan is. Ideally, the social worker who's working with expectant mom is having these conversations. And beyond that, if you're matched, that social worker is pulling you into those conversations. So you can say, mom and I were talking about naming the baby. And this is something important because this conversation will happen at the hospital at some point. So here's mom's feelings on this. Can we talk to you a little bit, adopting family, about what your feelings are about this? Things like, okay, mom is thinking about maybe inviting you to delivery. Is that something you'd want to do? So having someone there to really help facilitate those conversations is a massive, massive asset. If you don't have that, or if your social worker hasn't made any initiative to do that, ask them to. These can be conversations that are hard to have, especially if you're putting expectant mom and an adoptive parent in the same space to have those conversations. There's a lot of raw emotion. There's a lot of, that tiptoeing around, I don't want to say something to upset her or make her feel like I'm claiming her baby, but I want to have these conversations. Definitely ask to have those conversations and ask to have a social worker there. An attorney, if you're working with an attorney, should be able to do that. You can also, as a side note, if you're working with an attorney and you don't have a social worker working with you, ask that attorney to contract a social worker who is
Yeah.
skilled in adoption services to provide these. They do these hourly. So let's say you're working with an attorney, the attorney would call me and say, Kathryn, can you provide 5 hours of support for this family? And then they bill the family at an hourly rate to do that. And then what I do is go in, figure out what they need support with, and then I have those conversations. If you're in a space where you don't have a social worker who is doing that, can do that, or you don't have one at all.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, and this might just be my perspective as a birth mom, having twice created hospital plans in both very different situations. But I think that initial conversation of what an expectant mom wants the hospital plan or the hospital experience to look like, I think that's a really important conversation for her to be able to have with just her social worker or with her caseworker or with an attorney. Because, like you said, there's a lot of emotions. And I see so many times, we've had expectant parents and adoptive parents in the room when we're talking about a hospital plan, and an expectant mom will say, yes, I want you in the delivery room. Yes, I want you to be the one to name the baby. And then as soon as the adoptive parents leave, she's like, Jess, that's really not what I'm comfortable with. Can we have this conversation again? And so I think when you give expectant moms that space to really talk about what they want that experience to look like, because it's about them. It's not, that day, that experience is truly not about adoptive parents. And I know that that's super hard to hear sometimes and wrap your head around, but just from a birth parent's experience, we don't get a lot of one-on-one alone time with our kiddos. And so having that experience and having that time in the hospital, like adoptive parents, you get every other first that our kiddos have. And so just making sure that you're allowing expectant and birth families to kind of have that space is just really important. Oh no, I think Kathryn froze on us. She should be back in just a second.
Back, I'm
Um,
back.
Yay, excellent.
It looked like you froze from my end, so something crazy
Oh
happened.
no,
Yeah.
it is storming here, so it's very possible that I'm the one that froze.
Well, I think what we were talking about was the idea that these conversations shouldn't be had for the first time so if I'm the social worker, I'm not bringing Jess and
Yes.
intended parents together for the first time to say, hey, Jess, how do you envision your hospital experience going? And it's really specifically not done like that. I will
Yes.
also tell you there are so many situations where I'm asking Jess, hey, how do you envision this going? And she might say, oh, I don't know. I didn't know I had a say in how this goes. And so giving her that space to say, okay, I don't know. What are my choices? And then me saying, okay, I'll call you next week. We'll talk about it next week. It gives her space to hear these things, to think about these things. And I guarantee you, the women who are being asked in the moment, what do you want? And then put it on paper, those feelings evolve because then they start
Hmm.
thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe that isn't how I want it to. Do I want it to go that way? So we really have to give space to educate. Hey, Jess, here's some things you should think about. Do you want the family in the room with you? Do you want to name the baby? Do you want to hold the baby? And then revisit and revisit and revisit and reassure her that whatever she says then is not set in stone and she can change that later. And I think then bringing family in to say, okay, Jess and I have been talking today. This is what we're thinking. This is kind of how we envision this going. She's said that these are the things that are really important to her, but as always, she reserves every right to change her mind that day on anything that we're discussing. But I think that also gives the adoptive family some sense of, okay, what is expected of me? Generally speaking, what does she want from me? Because most families also are really intentional. They want to behave well. They want to show up well. They want this to go well, not just in the sense that they bring home a baby, but also they want to be respectful and they want to make mom feel really supported. They often just show up and are like, okay, nobody's told me what I'm supposed to do here. Does she even want me here? There's no one here to ask. Sometimes there's not a social worker at the hospital who's really skilled. So they're kind of like, I don't know, should I go to her room? Do I not go to her room? Should I bring her coffee? Do I not bring her coffee? Does she want to see me? Does she not want to see me? So really asking for someone to help have these conversations ahead of time will really relieve the pressure for all of you on that day. It also creates that space where you know that you've had these conversations. It's safe to talk about these things. It's not the opposite of this is the situation where families come in, mom comes in, and they've all had these thoughts the whole time. Like, well, what is this going to look like? And what are the expectations for me? And what's my choice? What's not my choice? And nobody's talked about it. So everyone just kind of gets there and continues not talking about it. But if that's what's happening, then you are definitely going to step on someone's toes and you are definitely going to do something offensive. And you are definitely going to be in a situation as the birth parent where you're not getting your needs met, or you feel
Mhm.
like, you're swallowing it and swallowing it and swallowing it until you just want to scream because nobody's seeing what you want, but you haven't said what you want. So again, social worker support and having these conversations before really, really, really changes the way that whole experience goes.
Yeah. And at having and like when you're a professional having those conversations, I think it's super important to remember that your priority is the expectant parent because when, and I will never forget this conversation when I was making an adoption plan for Ella. I was sitting with the adoption assistant because we did a private adoption. We worked with an attorney, and I was sitting with the adoption assistant writing my hospital plan. And he gets to the question and he asks who I want in the delivery room. And I said, my my best friend at the time. And he stops writing and he like puts his little notepad down and he looks at me and he goes, "You don't want the adoptive parents in the delivery room with you?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Well, not even the adoptive mom?" I said, "No. I was about to be 30 years old. I I knew them, but we'd only been talking for a couple of months. I didn't know them all that well." And he goes, "Well, this is a really important day for them. You don't want them to be able to experience this with you." And I got up and I walked out, and I was really close to just walking away from my adoption plan in general because that's a really traumatic day. And to have that lack of support, um, thankfully he didn't work there, too much longer, but that for someone who was in a different place than I was, like that's a really traumatic conversation to have and a really bad way to have it.
Yeah. I think the way that I typically have the conversations is not, oh, you don't want them there, because that then makes you feel like, should I? Oh my gosh, I didn't, oh my gosh. And then you kind of start spinning thinking, well,
Right.
uh, right? It takes this experience that is very much yours and makes it someone else's, which as the provider and as adopting parents, that's really the thing we want to protect. We want to protect this experience as the birthing parents, not anybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having that conversation as, here are your options. Some people do this, some people do that. You can do whatever you want. You just tell me what you feel like is right, and that's what we'll do. And
Yeah,
that's really the space that birthing families need to be in, knowing that ultimately whatever they want, that's what we'll do. We're guests in their space that day. This is not about anybody else except them.
exactly. And so we have created the hospital plan using plan very loosely. What happens when that changes?
So again, ideally, you're in a space where you have someone at the hospital with you. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, in situations where I'm doing placements, I've hired a doula for mom. Mom calls and says she's in labor. Call the doula. The doula goes and spends the whole labor and delivery with her. Generally speaking, I try to not be there for that because that's again her experience, and I'm a professional. So for me coming in, it's like the cloud of what's ahead for her is looming. So to preserve that space for her, you send the doula in, she delivers, and then I go in, I check on her. Always go see her first. We talk about things like, okay, how'd it go? How are you feeling? what do you want to do? Do you want adoptive family to come? Do you want them not to come? What are we doing right now? And if she says, the family's here down the hall, I saw them already and I really feel uncomfortable with them still being here, then we'll talk that through. And then I will go to the family and say, hey, listen, do you mind just, going to the hotel for tonight? I think that's really what she will appreciate most right now. So I can be there to help her voice some of these really challenging things.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, most people really have a hard time asserting things that make other people uncomfortable. So if there isn't someone else there to help, a nurse who's really, I think, empathetic to the situation and experienced with this, sometimes can be a really great advocate. Sometimes hospitals have great social workers who do this really well, but by and large, they don't, because there are no training programs for nurses. There are no training programs for any type of provider on how to do this. Nobody gets adoption training in their programming. So any nurse or professional that you're working with that's doing it well is just doing it because she's a kind person or he's a kind person and has empathetic feelings towards the situation, or has done it enough that they've learned a thing or two. So generally speaking, relying on like, okay, we'll go to the hospital and who's ever there will just help is not, don't count on that. Because if you get one that does, you're like really, really lucky. Not to scare you, but just to be very real
Yeah.
about what's ahead. So if you're working with an agency who has a representative in town, they very much should be there to help support the hospital experience. So when I do this, I'm there and I'm sending things back to the office for my team to help me do. So if I'm with mom and she says, okay, I need these things to happen, someone in the office is doing the paperwork for placement and then also being able to change things as we go. So I think having a person, a live person at the hospital to help mediate these things is critical, because otherwise what happens is you have two people who are really trying to merge, but it's strained at times just because she's delivered a baby. Sometimes delivery is traumatic, it's long, it's exhausting, it's terrifying, it's joyous, it's this absolutely consuming experience, and you're not necessarily ready 2 hours after to make these decisions
Right.
or have these conversations. And then on the other hand, you have a family who's like, I've been waiting for probably years for this moment. And I'm so excited to have these conversations. And I want to know what she wants from me. And I want to know how to do this. And so you sometimes have these two situations that it's just, you got to find a way to mesh them. And again, there's often not someone there to say, okay, well, tell me what you're feeling, tell me what's going on, and then let me see how I can help. And sometimes that's just running back and forth to rooms saying, okay, here's what I think she's ready to do this. Are you okay with that? And I'll let her know. And sometimes it's just sitting with one of the families and just being available so that when something
Mm-hmm.
comes up, they can say, hey, Kathryn, can you check on this? Do you know how she feels about this? Do you know how they feel about this? So I think that is best case scenario. Want to be real that for many people, you won't have that. You won't have a person to do that. So I think as the adopting family, being very aware that it would be great to have a person doing that. You don't. So you might have to be the person that thinks about that and says, okay, I want this, but I don't know what she wants. And I feel really uncomfortable about asking her, but I know I have to. So maybe I'll go pull the nurse in and see if she could help me do this. Maybe I'll ask if there's a social worker here that could help me. Maybe I'll just go and try it and see. And if I make a mess, it's okay. I will just say, I'm new at this. I've never done this before, and I want this to be good for everybody. So here's what I'm going to do. Birth parents, I think by and large, Jess, and you can attest to this, want to be asked what they want. They don't want you to be
Yes.
making decisions for them. They don't want you to be assuming. If in doubt and you're the only one at the hospital and you don't have support, go check on her. Say, hey, Jess, I'm just wondering, I can go get lunch if you'd like some time alone with baby. I know you said you didn't want that before, but I'd like to go get lunch. Is this a time where maybe you want to spend with your baby? So I think being proactive, again, giving space for her to change her opinion on something
Mm-hmm.
and re-giving that space over and over again. If you don't have that support, it's going to be down to you to do it, and you'll just have to do it. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. And I know it can be, I had this conversation with an adopting family, a month ago. Their kiddo's birth mom was in the hospital and delivering, and they had this hospital plan all worked out, and it changed. The second she got into the hospital, the entire plans changed. They were planning on being there. She said, no, I don't really want you here. I want this time. And that can be really, really scary. But allowing her that space and giving her that day or those 2 days or those hours is really, really important to her. And she will remember those for the rest of her life. She will cherish those for the rest of her life. And then when your kiddo grows up, you get to tell them that, those first 2 days in the hospital, it was just you and your birth mom. And that's a really special, they're not going to remember it, but that's a really special story and feeling that they get to have growing up.
Yeah. So as you're talking, Jess, one of the things that I'm remembering is a really negative experience I had with a family. And I think I use the word selfish because that's the closest word I know how to describe it. But I don't think it was coming from a place of negative intent. I don't think they even realized that what they were doing was really not kind. Um, and so again, I struggle with that word selfish, but I think the choices that this family was making in the hospital were entirely egocentric, all about them. And I think if you haven't done the work before a match and a placement to look inward, why am I adopting? Where are the holes in my heart that have led me to this place that I need to fill before I try to make a child fill that space? I think that is really important work. I think that's painful work because for a lot of families, they come into this space with again, often years of really challenging, painful experiences that brought them here. And I've never met a family who's adopting that doesn't very desperately want to parent. I mean, this takes a lot of work and money and time, and it is heartache to get to
Mhm.
this space. So I want to put that there. I recognize that. I think that when you get to the hospital, it is so essential just to say, I have no control over how this is going to go. And I want to be a good human. And I want this woman and her child to leave this space feeling like this experience was positive and empowering, and they got everything they needed from it. And if that means that I, as the adopting parent, don't, that has to be okay. And I
Mhm.
think if you can shift your perspective and show up in really a place of it is so painful to say, what will be, but you have to. And if you can't do it necessarily fully internally, which I don't know that you can, I think outwardly you need to be as this is not about me as you can. You can do that by recognizing that most of the support at the hospital is going for mom. It's not going to be there for you. If you're taking care of the baby, you'll have the nursing staff there. You'll have people there to support you. But ultimately, mom needs to be rallied around. She needs to be supported. She needs to be checked in on. So if your worker comes to the hospital and checks on birth mom first before checking on you, it's okay. That's
Mhm.
expected. If you feel like, I've paid for this package of services and I'm getting 10 of the 100 hours that this worker is spending and I don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's how it's going to be. And you have to remember that past discharge, past consent signing, you get all of the attention. The adopting family gets all the attention. You get the worker in your home checking on you. You get the calls saying, is everything okay? You get all of the support then, but you really have to allow that time at the hospital to be hers. And some of the really bad experiences I, as a professional, have had are families who feel entitled to all the attention from the professional, wanting, minute to minute updates on, well, where are we at with consent and where are we at with paperwork and what comes next and when can we leave and when can we, and I get that these are all things that feel urgent, but on the other end of this is a woman who's making the biggest decision of her life, is often alone. I think more often than not, I've supported women who have no one else.
Mhm.
Um, who are often delivering their first babies, which is, again, terrifying and not always what you expect and consuming physically and emotionally in itself. And then they're doing this choice for adoption. And so they're literally just getting through each minute. And that's where I'm needed. So I think that, again, if you can really just be aware of what's going on potentially in the other room, it helps you separate yourself to be able to say, okay, I'm here. I'm here. If this baby comes home with me because she wants that for me, then yay. And I'm going to do that so well. But if these few days go by and the baby doesn't come home with me, that has to be okay too. All I can do now is just be here, and that's it. And again,
Mhm.
I know that's really, I don't know that there's any other time in life where we're really expected to do that. And so there's no like, here's how to do it well, or, oh, I've done this before, so I've got this. It's really unique in that sense. And I also think sometimes people don't know how they're going to behave until they're in the situation. So I think for adopting parents, another thing that I'm encouraging you to do in this hospital stay is be very mindful of your own needs, because no one else is going to be looking out for your needs. So things like, I got to go get some coffee. Or, I really would love to just go take a walk, go take a shower, go take a break and come back. Please do those things. Um, when we're not fed, when we're not hydrated, when we're not sleeping well, we're not our best selves. And so those things really need your attention in this space. Um, Even if you are the one caring for the baby during this time, one of the things that does happen often in the hospital is expectant mom then says, okay, I've delivered baby and I would like you, the adopting parent, to be here. I want you to room in. I want you to, often hospitals will set aside a room for the adopting family, that they can then stay overnight in the hospital for the duration of time the child is there. And so they'll then do all of the baby care. And oftentimes moms are okay with that. They'll say that, right? Like this, I've delivered this baby and I know that you're the parents. And so I would like you to do these things. And so you get your room, you get to do all the things with the baby, and that does happen sometimes. Still be very mindful of your own needs. I know that's really challenging when you're taking care of a newborn in a strange place in the confines of a hospital room. But those are the times where things get heated, voices get raised, things get said because you are again trying to do this really overwhelming task of staying very neutral in a space where you want to just yell with joy and make the process done so you can just leave and be a parent, and I get all of that, but that's kind of the there's a lot of intensity in those days in the hospital, so doing the best you can to care for yourself so that you are your best self, I think, is the best piece of advice. If you leave with nothing else, take that
Yes.
video.
Yes. Okay, one last question, and then we will open it up to questions
Yeah,
because you and I have
I
been
love that.
talking for a long time. Um, but when we're at the hospital and adoptive parents are there, are we or what's appropriate when it comes to gifts for expectant mom in the hospital?
Okay, so here's my take on it. If you go to deliver any human in the hospital, I'm sorry, visit any human after they've delivered, you bring them something. You
Yes.
always do. You bring a coffee, you bring candy, you bring a card, you bring flowers. That's just sort of in our culture what you do. It shows that you thought about them before you got there. It shows that you want them to feel special and seen. And you would do this for anyone. I mean, honestly, think about who you've ever visited after a big moment. You do
Hmm.
this. This is no different. The space that this is different in is that if you adopt this child and you're in a state where you are not allowed to gift, all gifts have to go through an attorney, which I'm in Pennsylvania and that is a law here. So if I'm to say go to the hospital with a $200 gift card, that's wildly inappropriate because the attorney is then going to say, wait a minute, you've sent this huge gift to her now. And now this looks like coercion. You have brought money to the hospital and she's not signed consent and you're trying to adopt her baby. And this is wildly illegal. So first thing is make sure you know your state's laws. Second, when we're talking about gifting, we're not talking about like laptops and $200 gift cards and a envelope full of money. We're talking about
Yes.
something thoughtful that you would bring at the hospital. And I would challenge you to find an attorney who would say, oh no, there's no way you can do that.
Right.
So when you go to the hospital, please bring her something. If you know her, bring her something you know she would like. If you don't know her well, bring her something generic that would most likely make any woman happy. Honestly, the moms that deliver and the families bring something, it's such a treasure because they feel like you see them, not just you see their baby. So
Hmm.
some things that I always suggest are anything that's like hospital care, like the air's so dry. So chapstick, a water bottle, lotions, anything that can really help her feel like, okay, now I've delivered this baby and I just want to feel like clean and good and fresh. So anything like spa, like really is great. Slippers, a little blankie, any if flowers, if she likes flowers, just something, a journal. I'm trying to think of all the things I've seen people bring where mom has been
Her
like, this is
favorite
great.
snacks.
Her favorite snacks. If she likes magazines, that's a real gift sometimes. So you figure typically she's delivering, if she's had a smooth delivery, she's going to be there a day, 2 days. Not a lot to do in a hospital room. So just anything that might just bring her joy, give her a moment of like, okay, it's something different for my day.
Mhm.
That's a really good intention. We also, as an agency, have created gift boxes for this specific purpose. It's called Solace. And one of our gift boxes is full of all kinds of spa things. So, like a little ceramic dish that you do a little face mask kit in, chapstick, lotion, just things so that when she's opening this box, she's like, yay, it's a box just for me. The cost that I'm encouraging you to look at is less than $100 is probably appropriate. No gift cards, no money, nothing that can be interpreted as a bribe, but something thoughtful, small, don't go nuts. That's the suggestion.
Perfect advice. And
But do
I,
it. Definitely do it, right?
yes, absolutely. I, my birth plan completely went out of the window. I was supposed to deliver in Louisiana, and long story short, I ended up delivering my daughter while I was on vacation in Michigan. But before that, my daughter's adoptive parents had like reached out to my best friend and was like, hey, what does Jess like to read? What size slippers? What are her favorite snacks? And they had put together this little gift basket to bring me in the hospital. I didn't get to get it because life, had different plans, but they still made me a similar type gift basket when we all got back to Louisiana and I had gone to the attorney's office to actually sign my consents. I met with the attorney and signed, and they had a gift basket there for me that had like, you know, a bottle of wine and my favorite snacks and a new book and just small, like thoughtful things like that. But it was just really kind and thoughtful and very supportive.
Yes, so please do that. Put that in your notes, everybody,
Yes.
that is absolutely a gesture that is appreciated and encouraged.
And if you guys want to check out, I love the Solace boxes. I just put the link in the chat. So I encourage you guys to check those out. They are, you know, just incredible and so thoughtful, and almost all local products,
Mhm.
which is great. Does anyone have any specific questions about? I know that we've talked a lot and it's been a ton of information, and I hope you guys have all found it useful. But does anyone have any questions? Feel free to either unmute yourself or drop them in the chat and we can ask.
Hey there.
Hello. Oh, go ahead.
Hi.
Hey there. So my husband and I are going to be birth parents any day now, hopefully. And one of the things I wanted to make sure that I understood is what are some of the decisions, again, if we're able to make those decisions and the birth mom hasn't, that are about the child during their hospital stay that we should consider. So like for instance, like do you have a full name picked out? Are there certain procedures or shots or something that are traditionally done in the hospital that we would need to just consider?
Yes, great question. Okay, so typically in the hospital, in the first couple days, mom is making decisions about treatments that she wants during delivery. So there's like an eye goop that I think it's erythromycin that generally they give babies, but that's a choice mom makes whether she's going to do that or not. It's a goop on the eye that prevents STD spread. And so that's something she decides. That's sometimes just a conversation. A baby will get a vitamin K, I believe is the injection that they get shortly
Mhm.
after birth, which helps with clotting. That is something that generally speaking, all babies get, but that is a decision that she'll make. They get information about circumcision. If the child is male, that's a conversation. They typically do that right away in the hospital if she consents to that. As I'm saying these are all things that by law are her decisions to make. She delivers the baby until she signs consents. You have no say in any of this. If she would like your say in it, or if she says, I don't care, that's up to the parents to decide, then these are decisions you should have some feelings about potentially, because it could potentially be your decision to make. However, just so you know legally, like if you have this conversation about circumcision and she says, I don't care, ask the parents, and you say, no, we don't want that, then she's the one signing the form that says I decline, not you. It's your wishes, but she signs. You can't consent for anything for this child at that point. There is a hepatitis B vaccine that they get at the hospital. There's like a first of 3 doses. So she'd be making a decision about that.
And
Things
this
that,
is, and this is because all these things traditionally come so quick in the process that she has, in most states, she has not signed off on consent or termination, right?
yes,
Okay.
yes. So like in our state, you can't sign for 72 hours. So any decisions that need to be made legally, she has to make. So if she like ghosts and there is no one to make decisions, but comes back to sign consents, then some of these things are then discussed later. So let's say she didn't make a decision about these vaccines, or she didn't decide about circumcision. Well, then you've then taken custody of the child, consents have been signed. Now you can revisit some of these things. You take your records to your provider and discuss some of these things. And that sometimes happens too. Sometimes moms just are sort of like froze about making decisions. And so then these might be things you can decide on. I think there's some other things that during baby care are sometimes choices that in the scheme of things that we think, I didn't even know that was a choice I could make.
Yeah.
There's a lot of benefit to delaying the first bath. In the hospital, a provider will come in and say, let's do the first bath. So knowing some things about how the vernix, which is that cheesy stuff that babies are born with, is really quite protective for their skin. It's a lot of benefit to delaying that first bath for several days and instead just using that vernix. They rub it in like a moisturizer, and then the baby doesn't need a bath for the first few days. Those are things that you might want to think about, because if she says, no, go ahead, you guys can take care of baby while we're here, it's your baby, you make the decisions, then this information. There will be things like the type of formula that you're going to use, the type of diaper you're going to use, the diaper cream you're going to use. These are all things, if mom wants to breastfeed at the hospital and not feed baby at the hospital, that's a conversation that you might need to have. Certainly have these conversations about if mom starts breastfeeding at the hospital and this is something that she'd like to continue, how can you support that? Is she pumping and freezing and shipping it to you? Are you covering the expense for that? Those are things that you can talk about. Jess, what else am I missing?
I think you've covered just about everything. I will say, just since you brought up breastfeeding, if your kiddos, if expectant mom or birth mom decides or says that she wants to breastfeed, please don't be afraid of that. It does not mean that she is changing her mind or anything like that. Sometimes that's closure for her, or it's, like one last thing that she can do for them. So just, I know that I've had that conversation with adopting families before, and they have been super terrified when their kiddo's birth mom says she wants to breastfeed. But you don't have to be afraid of that. It can be really obviously beneficial for the kiddo with all the health benefits of breast milk, but also a really healing experience for her.
I also had a client once who pumped and shipped because for her, she said, I can't raise my child. I can't be the one to do that, but this is something I can do. And I recognize all the benefits of breast milk, and I would like to be able to do that. So definitely look into that. Frank, were there any other things that you thought of when we were talking that might be on
No,
your mind?
that's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Anyone else?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Marquita from MK Adoption Services, and I just wanted to say thank you, ladies, so much for offering this session. Everything you shared aligns with what we tell our families, so thank you so much.
Thanks
Absolutely.
for
Thank you
being
so
here.
much. Yeah, thank you.
Actually, as Marquita's here, her partner, Candy, had posted something recently talking about the things that are not your choices in those first few days. And so if you don't follow MK Adoption Services, that's a great account. They talk a lot about the things that you can be doing well. I think one of those things that she posted was naming the baby. And while we don't have time here to talk about all of that, Absolute Love Adoptions, where I work, we also have a resource about naming the baby and how you can have some of those conversations, because again, that is not your choice. I know that for some people you're like, what are you saying? But that is a conversation that you and mom should be having together about what her wishes are, because ultimately her choice for name is the first name this child gets. And in ideal situations should be the name that they keep. So having some conversations before about how to do that well. We have a blog about that that gives you some very concrete ideas for how to do that. So kind of put that on your list of resources that you can kind of mull over as you move towards match and placement.
Yes. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Caitlin. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So, me and my husband have had three biological children, and now we're going through the adoption process. So, I guess like my mind is I always want to help the situation, but how appropriate would it be to even try to say, like, oh, okay, like I've been in the hospital before, even though every birthing situation is obviously different, but to almost like I don't want to help. Like, should there be options to help? I don't want to feel like I'm trying to encourage one way or the other. Like, does that make sense on like what would be a safe line or conversation, I guess, to have around that?
So, Caitlin, are you talking more like specific things that she might ask, or just sort of like general presence at the hospital?
I guess really both.
Okay.
Just like I know, like the three births I've had have all been different and all been crazy. Like I totally know and appreciate every situation's going to be different. So it's not like I want to push myself forward and like, oh, when I did this, this is what happened and that kind of thing. But to be able to have, I guess, kind of be there if the situation comes up, if that makes sense.
Okay, so my suggestion for you is that as a woman who has been through birth, you have really unique perspective on what that can look and feel like. And so I think that gives you a space to relate to mom who may not have been in this situation before, or maybe has. I think there's a lot of camaraderie in having shared a pregnancy and shared a delivery experience. And so I think that channeling that a little bit and showing up in a way that a friend would, who says, hey, I had an experience like this and this is what it went like, or oh, maybe this is something you could try. I think that's very positive. I think you'll have to just be very mindful of, you also have this layer of, I'm the person who's on the receiving end of your child. And so that can feel threatening or just challenging in terms of expectant mom's ability to hear that. But I think this goes back to, and Jess, I'd love to know what you think. This goes back to just having conversations with her and knowing how she feels about that. I think you can say, hey, I've been in this experience before and I'm open to sharing if you'd like to know what my experience is. I think that gives her space to say no, thank you, or sure.
Yeah. And I also think if she has had other kiddos before, maybe it's not the place to offer your perspective or insight. But I think if she's going through this experience of childbirth as a first time mom, then ask if she wants your insight, your perspective. But like Kathryn said, give her the space to either accept or say no, thank you.
I think sometimes in this experience too, there's this dynamic of the expectant parent, the birth parent feeling like they sometimes are made to feel like they know nothing. And that the person that's going to adopt their baby is better than them in some way. I think there's often this dynamic of, and whether this is like intentionally communicated or something that's internal for women, there's often this feeling of, I can't do this for my child, and you're the person who's going to be doing it. So as happy as I am that I found you and I chose you and you are the person I want to do this, I also feel a little bit resentful that you're going to be the person that gets to do this and that I'm not. And so sometimes there's these sort of internal things happening that also contribute to her ability to have you in her space, receive your advice, and not feel some kind of way about that.
Yeah,
That help, Caitlin?
absolutely.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you to touch on something too? I think your talk, by the way, was amazing. So thank you for sharing so much. It was like amazing. My question is, you touched on it a little bit, and I just have experienced this as well in the hospital before on professionals, whether it be a nurse or a social worker that is not adoption friendly and really kind of throws a wrench into things. How do you suggest if a family doesn't have, or a mom doesn't have like boots on the ground, somebody actually there to help advocate for them, like as a family, how would you suggest or recommend a family helps navigate that experience?
Yeah, great question, Lori. So I think that the idea is that you channel your inner social worker as much as you can and really just, you're a human and you're a kind human, and you'll see these things happening around you and you'll have a reaction to it. And I think for a lot of families, they'll try to be like, not my place, or I don't know, maybe this is normal. But ultimately, if you see something going on around you that makes you feel like that doesn't feel good, answer that. Use your voice to say, you know what, I'm not sure about that. Let's ask mom. So for example, if this, and this is kind of what these things happen, this is what it looks like. So you're caring for the baby. Let's say mom was okay with you rooming in for the baby. And she said, yeah, go ahead and make all the decisions. And then the nurse comes in and she says, okay, mom and dad, let's do the first bath time. I've got all your stuff here. And you're thinking, oh, I know this is special. I would love to do this, but I don't want to take this from birth mom if she's not ready for me to have this. So I'm going to say, do you mind coming back in a few minutes? I'd like to go ask mom if she's comfortable with this first. Or nurse, can you please go ask mom if she's comfortable with me doing the first bath before we make any choices here about that? Because those are things that once done, you can't undo. So I think if you're a kind human, you're going to start thinking things like, okay, the first bottle, that's huge. The first outfit, that can be huge. Taking the footprints, that's huge. A person who's birthed a child may want to be there for those things. And if I just do this because mom said once, okay, go ahead and do this, I'm taking these moments she can't get back. So I'm just going to say, I'm not sure. Let's just run this by mom. And maybe you do this a few times and mom is like, oh my God, Lori, just do it already. Stop asking. Then you know you've asked. Then you know she feels really confident about you doing everything. But I think if you just really lean into your heart, you will see things happening. Other things might be like, maybe the nurse says or does something in front of you. Okay, so sometimes I've been in situations where we're all in a room together and we're just sharing space. And nurse comes in and she wants to know something about the child or the plan. And she looks at the adoptive parents and asks. She'll say, well, what are we doing for the first bath? And instantly you're like, oh gosh, I don't know. What do I do? So channel that. That obviously makes you uncomfortable. It probably made birth mom uncomfortable too. So say, I don't know, let's ask mom. Just embracing this idea that you're just there. You're kind of like furniture for this experience, and you're just going to kick it all back to mom until you feel like she's either asserted, stop kicking it back to me, I'm good, or she said, yeah, you know what, I would really love to do all this stuff. So yeah, I'm going to take all this. So I think, Lori, if that answers your question, I hope, but I think just being really proactive about using your own heart and your own instinct, because it's there. It's just, I think, often clouded by a lot of the do this, don't do that adoptive parents get around this experience. And I think they sometimes feel like it's so hard to make the right choice because I don't want to do it wrong. And there's no one here to support me, or this person said that, or this person said that. Quiet the noise, go with your heart, because more often than not, that's where you need to be.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Excellent advice, Kathryn. I think we have time for one last question. Does anyone have one last question they wanted to ask? If not, that's okay, no pressure.
We love questions.
I'll ask one last question. If no one else is going to, do you have any suggestions also, just so like this conversation is prepared for everything, about when Child Protective Services gets involved at the hospital, if that ever is something that's happening, like how to address that as an adoptive parent, or if you have any say or involvement or anything like that?
So typically, if Child Protective Services is getting involved, there is nothing that you as the family can do other than continue to be kind and empathetic. Really, if that happens, there is your agency needs to be the one taking care of the logistics on all of that. Most of the time, if this was a planned adoption and CPS shows up, It's as simple as this mom's already made an adoption plan, so this child's care is not, they're not in danger. And it's really just like a formality of making sure that this child's cared for. In some states, there's laws about, you know, if mom tests positive for certain substances or if baby does, then someone needs to be called. Sometimes it's just protocol. Other times it might be a mom that has had involvement with during pregnancy, maybe no one was aware of it, and they're doing their job to make sure that this loop is closed. Sometimes that can feel really scary, but really all you can do is say, yes, we're here. We were chosen as the parents for this child, and we are fully prepared to take this child. And then just, you know, be furniture and let your agency care for it. I think you can also check in with mom, and just reassure her that you're still there.
Great question, Lori.
I love your furniture comment, by the way. That's like amazing. I call it a leaf blowing on the tree, but I like furniture.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for this morning. Thank you so much, Kathryn. It is always just an absolute joy to talk to you and learn from you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I know if you're on the West Coast, it was bright and early for you this morning. But if you want to find Kathryn, you can find her over at Absolute Love. And we will hopefully have Kathryn back again.
Yeah, I love this a lot. So thanks everyone for being here. I love talking about this stuff. If you have other questions or thoughts, feel free to send me a message, send me an email. I'm happy to help you explore some of these conversations.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you both.